You guys know Matt Harmon, football writer, analyst for Yahoo Sports. He is the reception perception creator. He is someone that is incredibly tall and handsome in real life, that's for sure. Matt Harmon, welcome to the Joe Holka Show, man. Pleased to have you with us.
Joe, what's going on, man? It's good to be here. I can't believe we've actually got games to talk about, man. Like it's awesome. I can't, like, I don't know about you, man, but to me it just feels like we're really lucky to be here in some way.
It does feel lucky, man. It's been a weird off season to say the least. First off, congratulations on your engagement. I think that's amazing. I think that there's the last time I saw you, you were very against the girlfriend thing. So I'm glad that turned around for you since the last time.
Well, you got to just find the right one, man. I think you know that.
There you go.
People that have been there know it, and you can be one of these people like I used to be. Consistently saying like, that's like not real, whatever. That's just something that people say, and then it happens, and then you accept it, and it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You can't fight it anymore, man. Fair enough. All right, man. So everyone, obviously, we're here to talk wide receivers. Of course, we don't have a lot of time. We're going to be super efficient, talk through some guys. I think a good starting point, Matt, everyone's got their guys going into the year, right? And I'm sure you're no different, especially all the work that you're doing with reception perception. There's got to be guys that stand out. I know you've talked about guys like Devonte Adams that have really shown progression over the time. Now that you have like a decent sample size with some of these data points that you're collecting over multiple years, you've been kind of able to give a little bit of context to this data that you're doing, right? So who are the Matt Harmon approved wide receiver guys after your reception perception this year?
I would say that the great part about doing this for 6 NFL seasons now, and next year will be number 7, and I'll be as excited as ever for that one. It's that there's so much more understanding to what the data means. Like there are predictions that I said 2 years ago, 3 years ago, based off reception perception data that I wouldn't say anymore, and that's just the benefit of having a wider sample size, like you mentioned. But one thing that hasn't changed is I still get as excited about my guys as ever, and a few that I have coming into this year. I mean, honestly, Joe, the 2019 rookie wide receiver class is just awesome. I mean, those guys came into the NFL and showed it out right away, and I expect them to really rival like that 2014 group that with Odell and Allen Robinson. And, I think that they're going to be that type of class. And number one, to me, I think the best guy in the group is Terry McLaurin. He's a guy that I'm all in on this year, absolute reception perception stud, the 34th best success rate versus man coverage score that I've ever charted since 2014. That's over 250 players sampled. So he's a guy I'm all in on. Same with one guy I really actually like in week 1 is kind of a maybe a little under the radar guy is Deontay Johnson too. Another stud separator. Nice. Love the Steelers matchup against the Giants defense, which is just, completely undermanned. So I love Deontay Johnson this year, and I think he's someone you can fire up like right away in week 1.
What's the deal with these Steelers just like finding absolute gems in the draft? Like it always seems to happen. I love the Terry McLaurin call. I have brought up this data sheet that we have at Line Movement that, just looking at something like weighted opportunity rating over the last 4 games, top 10 in the league. Like he's just an absolute stud. 5,600 on DraftKings is too cheap for this guy. Do you have any concerns with who's throwing him the ball? Like, does that ever throw a wrench in these reception perception plans that you have?
Sometimes, but I mean, I look at Terry McLaurin as essentially being, a future superstar in the league, much like I looked at Allen Robinson coming into 2015, like a guy that was eventually going to be that clear elite number 1 receiver. So really, the proposition is very similar, I think, actually, to Robinson going to that season. Is he's going to get a ton of opportunity. We think the game scripts are going to be right for a ton of passes in Washington, just like they were in Jacksonville that year. And really, we're only asking Dwayne Haskins to be like Blake Bortles good. And I think Dwayne Haskins can be Blake Bortles good at the very least. Finished pretty strong over the last 3 games of the season, 67% completion rate, 5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, over 8 yards adjusted yards per attempt. Like, it's pretty strong, and McLaurin was very good in those 3 games too. And again, I think if you would just look at McLaurin's rate stats with Haskins last year, you can get him, if you progressed over a 16-game season, to over 1,000 yards. So we're really just asking for a little bit of growth from Haskins and all of the progress we hope from McLaurin to see to really intersect at the same time.
Love it. I should probably touch on this one because someone asked on Twitter earlier today. Anthony Miller, he's someone I've heard you talk about in the past. Some people are chatting about him being a potential cheaper option on DraftKings this week. Any thoughts on Miller overall?
Yeah, I like Miller a lot. I love the player. He was a guy that, I hyped up Terry McLaurin. I hyped up Deontay Johnson. These guys that jumped up the season-long ADP. But McLaurin always kind of stood down there. Anthony Miller always sort of stood down there in the double-digit rounds. Really never moved up. And I get it. The offensive ecosystem in Chicago is not great. Trubisky's getting his, the first of his last chances that he'll see in 2020. I understand the concern there, but Miller, I think, is a really good player, somebody that I compared favorably to Doug Baldwin coming into the NFL, and I think he's shown that kind of skill in limited looks. We really just need this guy to stay healthy because outside of Robinson in Chicago, there is not a ton of quality in the wide receiver room. The tight end room is filled with a lot of options, but also might not be filled with a lot of quality either. And I like that matchup in week 1 against the Lions. He's somebody I'll be tempted to use in daily fantasy. He's somebody I'll be tempted to throw out in multiple start wide receiver leagues. Like, I think he's got a good matchup there. I think the secondary is, all right in Detroit, but is undergoing a lot of changes. And I wouldn't be surprised if that game goes over the projected total too. I think Detroit's offense is another one that's really going to be fun to watch in the first few weeks of the season. They were on fire to start last year, and if they start throwing a lot, getting points on teams, then we could see other teams like Chicago having to throw a lot more than they plan to keep up.
Yeah, Reeves was just on about 10 minutes ago, and he mentioned that game as being one that could go over as well, that a lot of people probably aren't talking about. So that's nice to hear you say the same thing for sure. I think that the guy that I have to get your take on right out of the gates, we just saw him catch this absolute bomb in practice, and I hate like seeing these videos on Twitter sometimes just because it just gives me these weird biases. But someone I know that it's okay to have biases in favor of is Stefan Diggs, a guy that you were very early on relative to a lot of people just being an elite route runner in the league. So Stefan Diggs kind of in that mid-range this week, but against the Jets, a team that's been beat over the top repeatedly over the last couple years. Could be in a smash spot. Let's hear the Stefan Diggs take.
For one, I love Stefan Diggs. He's been a reception perception stud since, sort of the very beginning. And, I remember looking at myself in the mirror, Joe, back in March, like, hey, just because, you're like the internet's longest standing Stefan Diggs, John Brown guy doesn't mean...
Is that good?
Doesn't mean you need to become like a Josh Allen apologist. But now here in September, I've essentially like talked myself into this offense, like actually being a really high quality unit. And look, I get it. Like, Diggs is going to be volatile, pretty much just like he was in Minnesota last year. Like, there were weeks you absolutely hated yourself for using him in fantasy. There were others where, you loved it. Yeah, I think of that game against the Eagles when he went wild. I think the outlook is actually very similar. Like, I think the move from Minnesota to Buffalo is kind of a net neutral for Stefan Diggs from a fantasy sense, because run heavy team, questions at the quarterback position, different questions, but still questions. And, he has to share the targets with another good receiver in John Brown, just like he did with Adam Thielen. But this looks like one of those weeks where you want to fire up Stefan Diggs and really not ask yourself any questions about it. The Jets just traded their best player in the secondary. There's really not a ton of quality cover men at the cornerback position. And I think I think it's a great spot to use both Diggs and Brown. Obviously, Diggs is the higher quality option, probably going to get the most targets, but both of these guys I think are in consideration in week 1.
I wouldn't call myself a Josh Allen like truther or anything like that, but I end up playing him more than I probably should just because of that rushing ability, and it's just one thing that always seems to stand out to me on DraftKings at his price point. One of the things that
would it surprise you, Joe? Would it surprise you though if Josh Allen this year finishes top 3 in total touchdowns among quarterbacks, passing and rushing combined?
Absolutely not.
No, but I actually think it's set up very similar. And this is a comparison that, big draft like media threw around when Allen came into the league and people laughed at it. I was probably one of those people that laughed at it. But, think about Cam Newton going into his MVP season. Never a big time passing quarterback, but then just the conditions were right that year. He threw a ton of touchdowns, obviously ran for a ton of touchdowns. And this skill position group in Buffalo is so dramatically different than what Allen has played with so far in the NFL. The top 3 targeted players for Allen his rookie year were Zay Jones. Give me a break. He had like a sub 40% catch rate that rookie year. Kelvin Benjamin and running back LaShawn McCoy. Like, now going Diggs, John Brown, and Cole Beasley in the slot. Like, that is a much improved group. So I think we should leave it open to our imaginations that Allen could take, at least statistically, a pretty big step forward this year.
I love that. I hope the Jets can put up a little bit of a fight in this one so we can see that maybe go back and forth a little bit. One guy, again, I'm just going to touch on all the reception perception studs, I feel like. Let's talk a little bit about Seattle, because I do think that if they end up I feel we talk about this every year. If they give the keys to Russell Wilson, it's one of the most exciting offenses in the league. Will it happen? And are we looking at a guy like DK Metcalf as well? I'm curious your thoughts on how these guys match up individually. Like, I know you love Lockett, but is Metcalf a guy that's like still on your radar as well, or just gets overshadowed by how good Lockett has been in reception perception?
Oh, I love both of these guys. You know, Metcalf's another 2019 rookie that I'm really high on this year, coming into his second season. I actually compare Metcalf. I compared him coming into the NFL to Dez Bryant, and their reception perceptions are actually very similar. You know, in his rookie season, the Seahawks kept things very simple for DK, which I think was smart. Over 50% of his charted routes in reception perception were either a slant or a 9 route. But that's not too dissimilar to Dez in his 2014 reception perception sample. You know, in his peak, when he was at the height of his powers, he was running 57% of his routes were a go, a slant, or a post route. Again, keeping things pretty simple, because these guys aren't, you know, the quickest twitch whatever players, but they're freak athletes and they can win in these confined ways. And Metcalf was awesome in that confined assignment last year, and I think he's going to take a step forward. I actually think this duo could be very, very similar. Obviously, the raw passing volume is not going to be the same in Seattle as it was in Tampa Bay, but just how like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin pretty much owning like half of the Tampa Bay passing pie to themselves when they were healthy. I think that's what we could see with Lockett and Metcalf this year. So in season-long leagues, I didn't have any hesitation drafting either one of those guys at their ADP. I was especially ahead of the market on Lockett because I think each has truly developed into a star. And this matchup with Atlanta in week 1, I think is perfect to roll out the stack for these guys, because this is the type of environment where Seattle's not going to be able to just run away and hide. They're going to have to throw the ball to keep up with the Falcons, who I think could lead the NFL in pass attempts this year with another great wide receiver duo. So I like playing all of these guys in week 1.
I think that people sometimes get a little bit too wrapped up in these offenses they think aren't going to throw the ball as much. If there is such a condensed target share like what we might have in Seattle, it's almost just as valuable as some of these other spots where the volume is going to be higher, but it's going to be much more spread out, and honestly better for fantasy if we know where the ball is going, right? So I'm in on Seattle for sure this week, going forward, all of those things. Before we get out of here, I'm always curious, like you see a guy like Devonte Adams, someone that really struggled early in his career, but then really took some large strides in reception perception in particular. So was there anyone like that you saw this season, maybe even the season before, that could surprise some people, that has been a lot better than maybe they started out?
Yeah, I don't know if either of these guys are going to surprise. And no, let's be clear, like Devonte Adams is one of like the biggest outliers.
Okay, fair enough.
You know, this guy has gone from the second percentile success rate versus man coverage to literally the 99th in 2018. Nobody's gone from the bottom to the top like that. We're talking about bottom dwellers like Devin Funchess and Marquise Lee, who have eventually flamed out of the NFL. That was where Devonte Adams was. But two guys that have taken steady steps, like 10% jump in reception perception is pretty rare, but nothing's as rare as, like I said, with Adams. So two guys that did that, Kenny Goliday and Cortland Sutton. I think both of these guys are developing into, especially Kenny Goliday, developing into like true number 1 receivers, where I think people might still look at them as more just big contested catch vertical guys. I think we see those two guys both take another step forward this year. And Goliday is a guy I'm going to be extremely intrigued with every week because of how well the Lions threw the ball deep last year. Just one thing before we get out of here, crazy stat. I just saw this today. Yeah. Stafford in 2018, over a full 16 game season, had just over 1,700 completed air yards. In 8 games last year, he was just over 1,600. I mean, I think that is some wild stuff, just to show how different Detroit was from a philosophy standpoint last year. Wow.
That is crazy. Matt Harmon, everyone, from Yahoo Sports. Definitely check out all the great work he's doing over there. Follow him on Twitter. He's Matt Harmon _BYB. I messed that up on Twitter the other day. Matt, it's going to be fun chatting with wide receivers, about wide receivers each and every week with you, man. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week.
Looking forward to it, Joe. Thanks a ton.